The Force strikes back because all this time Plagueis is thinking, I'm not just gonna dominate the physical space with dark force powers. I'm going to control the force itself. I'm going to control really this mystical deity, this kind of, not really unknown, but this is a higher order of things that Plagueis is contending with, and he's like, I want to subject the force to my own will and my end goals and stuff like that. Well, force ain't having it. Force ain't having it. And here's the passage. It's a little long, but it's so crucial and it's so awesome. So I'll try to go through as speedily as I can. The question of whether he, Plagueis, Insidious, had discovered something new or rediscovered something ancient was besides the point. So there's been this huge revelation of all these years of what Plagueis has been after. All that mattered was that almost a decade earlier, they had succeeded in willing it to shift and tip irrevocably to the dark side. Not a mere paradigm shift, but a tangible alteration that could be felt by anyone strong in the Force, whether or not trained in the Sith or Jedi arts. The shift had been the outcome of months of intense meditation, during which Plagueis and Sidious had sought to challenge the Force for sovereignty and suffuse the galaxy with the power of the dark side. So claiming sovereignty over the Force. That's hubris if I've ever heard of it. Let's see. Brazen and shameless, and at their own mortal peril. So they're willing to torment themselves, and mortally speaking, at their own mortal peril, they had waged etheric war or celestial war, anticipating that their own midi-chlorians, the Force's proxy army, might marshal to boil their blood or stop the beating of their hearts. So they're fighting with the Force now on celestial levels, thinking that the Force could strike back and boil their blood and stop the beating of their hearts. That they're willing to go at these lengths to contend with the Force and ultimately dominate the Force. Risen out of themselves, discorporate and as a single entity, they had brought the power of their will to bear, asserting their sovereignty over the Force. No counterforce had risen against them, not yet. In what amounted to a state of rapture, they knew that the Force had yielded, as if some deity had been tipped from its throne. On the fulcrum they had fashioned, the light side had dipped and the dark side had ascended. And on that same day, they had allowed Venomous to die. And then, oh, wait, not yet. There's more. Then, by manipulating the Bith's midi-chlorians, which should have been inert and unresponsive, Plagueis had resurrected him. So he finally achieved immortality by bringing back the dead. The enormity of the event had stunned Sidious into silence and had overwhelmed and addled 114D's processors, Plagueis' assistant droid. But Plagueis had carried on without assistance, again and again, allowing Venomous to die and be returned to life until the Bith's organs had given out and Plagueis had finally granted him everlasting death. And so they're reveling in this, both, especially Plagueis. It's said that Sidious is just shocked into silence. But Plagueis says, I've done it. I have claimed sovereignty over the Force because I can achieve immortality. And they subjected to themselves to the Force pretty much killing them in response because they were using the Force profanely in such a profane way. But it says that no counterforce had risen against them. They didn't die. And so it hadn't risen against them, but they find out later that there had been a striking back of the Force, and that was at the conception of Anakin Skywalker. That is awesome. That is how the Force should be in the Star Wars lore. Even if people say, "Oh, that's just a book," and that's not meant to be part of the lore. I'm like, it is to me. Like they can have any interpretation of Anakin's conception, whatever. And they have in different comics and stories or whatever. But that to me is the reason why Anakin was conceived in Shmi. It was a divine order of things saying, okay, these two bad guys have really messed with the force powers in such a profane way. Force ain't having it, striking back, and then thus brings the balance. It's not this yin yang balance. Like this balance is not like this is 50% light side, 50% dark side. That's the balance. And if it's out of balance, it's like 75% dark side and 25% light side. That's a very wrong, I would say a very incorrect view of the force. What the balance is the force being the force itself. The force is the force itself. And any antithesis or any antithetical use of the nature of the force, that's what's the dark side. The manipulation of the force and leading these people into abusive Sith powers and machinations and manipulations of the physical sphere, involving the force. That's the imbalance. That's what has to be corrected. That has to be set right and set in place. Anakin, his conception and his incredible, very very much almost overpowered nature. That's the force striking back, saying the profanity has ensued. There are people out there claiming sovereignty over this, the very divine nature of the force. The force counteracts or counter responds, and then Anakin is born. Anakin Skywalker is born, and that's the lore. So this whole balance of the force is not. It's not a equal halves. It's not like this is the light side, this is the dark side, and there's an equal amount all across the galaxy. No, the dark side is the absence of the force as far as the nature of the force, and it's the bringing about, using profanely force powers to bring about destruction upon the galaxy. So you got to course correct it. Force has got to be whole again. Thus the balance.